How's it going, everybody? Welcome to the Ethicsverse, the coolest place to be, every Thursday at noon Eastern. If you are all about improving your company's culture and building a culture of integrity that can sustain in the new workplace. We got a real treat for you today. I know I say that every week, but boy, do I mean it. Today, we're talking about chief compliance officers and CEOs and how do we forge an effective C-suite bond. So much of our efficacy is really contingent on how well we work with other leaders in the organization and especially the level of endorsement we can get from executives. So we're going to be diving deep today, and we're going to be teaching you how to move from compliance officer to compliance executive. So as always, like we always like to say, your network is your net worth. If you're not taking advantage of this amazing community that we are all a part of, the ethics and compliance and human resource community, if you're not taking advantage of that, you're leaving a lot of influence and a lot of impact on the table. So as I go through over the next couple minutes this introduction, I encourage you to drop your LinkedIn URL and connect with at least one person. I also encourage you, the best way you can help support this endeavor is to share and invite other folks. What I've realized is that a lot of people don't realize that there are free CEUs available for all of these, free SHRM credits available for all of these. So it's a great way to knock out some of those live, those live credit requirements each year. And you might win a book, and you might make a friend, and so forth. So hit our link tree right here. This is where you can find Ethico everywhere across the internet. You can check out our YouTube page, which has all the best replays, all the best clips from the Ethicsverse and from our award-winning Ethics Experts podcast. You can book a demo. You can follow me on LinkedIn, and you can follow Ethico as well on LinkedIn. Today's prize is the one and only your year as a wildly effective compliance officer. So the more contributions you make in the chat, the more odds you have, or the higher odds you have on winning a book. Now is the time to get this book, you guys, because this year is starting. If it goes anywhere like last year went, it's going to go before, we're going to blink and it's going to be summertime. So try to be intentional. If you don't win, buy the book. I would really encourage it. But the more intentionality you can put into your work and how your year is going to go, the higher odds that you're going to wind up where you want. So we're giving away 5 of those because we love you today. So keep those comments coming. We're going to be integrating those comments into the conversation. This is like the one to go to, right? If you've missed a couple, today is the day. You're going to leave with a really reinvigorated perspective on what you can do, some really great actionable tips on how to start building those bridges. Thank you for these emojis. Keep these coming. I am starving. I always hunt hungry, so keep these emojis coming, and it'll keep my blood sugar where it needs to be so I don't crap out here. We are really going to be doing a push this year on these coaching sessions. So we give these out for free to our current clients. We've also expanded those out. We've also expanded that out to Ethicsverse members. So if you're an Ethicsverse member, which is free to sign up, by the way, if you're an Ethicsverse member and you're interested in an influence coaching session or an ROI coaching session, let us know. Drop a 1 in the chat, and someone from our team will reach out and set that up. And we have been batting 1,000 on helping people get the budget they need and helping them to build the persuasion path they need for the tools, for the new headcount, for whatever they need to expand those, their resources. So if you're interested in that, drop a 1 in the chat and we will help you out there. Ecosystem is our enterprise-wide disclosure tool. This is something that allows you to crowdsource risk intelligence at scale while also providing insights at the point of risk. You can see all these awards. I'm so proud of these awards that our team has won with this tool and with the service. If you are looking for a new tool, I encourage you to check out G2. I was shocked to find out how few ethics and compliance and human resource folks are actually going onto G2 to see what's out there. These are all verified reviews. Just like, we buy on Amazon, you look for those verified reviews. G2 is verified reviews for solutions providers for software. Check it out. Our company is built on client forward caring, on providing tools that are going to help you see around the curve and really, again, manage the risk within your organization. So if you're interested in that, reach out. I'm sure you know where to find us to book a demo. A couple of other books we want to push. Next week we're going to be doing this DE&I session. Our friend Mita Malik is phenomenal, massive thought leader. This book is flying off the shelves, New York Times bestseller, Wall Street Journal bestseller. If you're interested in reimagining, if you're interested in inclusion and the value that can provide to your workplace and to your culture, I encourage you to check that out. Of course, as we go through this list, you guys, we have all these books in the Ethico library. So if you get selected to win a book, you don't have to just get Christy's book. You can pick any one of these. The Champions Network, we're going to be doing a session with Matt Silverman soon about building that Champions Network within your organization, activating middle managers to really push out the impact and, activate more of these human sensors in your organization. So Champions Network, international bestseller. Of course, 65 cheat codes to level up your program. This is the book that we give away to new clients. We have a really fun, box that we're starting to send out to new clients, and we're giving these away to everybody. If you haven't picked this one up, highly encouraged to check it out. Mary Shirley's book is ripping off the shelves and shooting to the top of the charts. And then again, we've talked about this a little bit, but Tom Fox has this really fun series. So if you have kids, pick one of these up, go over it with them, teach them to speak up, tell them a little bit about what you do, or teach them how they can save the galaxy. So check out these fun books from Tom Fox. Also want to do a little podcast spotlight. So, we have the ethics experts where we try to talk to people on the front lines, thought leaders, authors, professors, so check that out, the ethics experts. These are 3 other podcasts that I think are 2 out of 3 I think are really going to be worth your while. So the Gallo, and you can guess which one I'm leaving out. The GalloCast is Nick and Gio talking to me and my brother talking to Tom Fox. We do these about once a month, and we're talking about current topics. 31 days to a better compliance program. If this is not in your rotation, this is like 5 or 10 minutes every single morning while you have your coffee. It's great to blast through this month, especially as we're looking toward 2024. Check out this podcast. They're little bite-sized pieces, phenomenal podcasts. 31 days to a better compliance program. Of course, all these little QR codes, if you don't know what those are, you should look those up, but that'll let you subscribe to it. And the Great Women in Compliance podcast, this is a really great podcast run by Lisa Fine and Hema Lomax, 2 friends of the family, friends of Ethico. Literally every single one that I watch I leave inspired, I leave informed. They're great hosts. So if you're not checking out these other podcasts, I really encourage you to do it. Our job is to sharpen our sword, and our job is to get better, right? And that's going to come not just from us practicing, but us getting new ideas, making those ideas our own, and pushing those out into our organization. 1 year free is still in effect. We push that forward to this year as well. So if you're interested in making a change or thinking about making a change this year and like to take advantage of that, scan that QR code and we can set something up. You can hear what kind of goes into that. But this is a great way if you're thinking about changing and you want to get away from the status quo. This is a great way to do it, to de-risk that transition, take a lot of pressure off your team, which is probably under-resourced as it is, and also get some real cash savings on upgrading your tool, upgrading your platform. So hit us up there. And next week, like I mentioned, we're going to be talking about equity, inclusion, and the bottom line. How do we build a sustainable IEDB strategy? And in 2 weeks, we're going to be managing the risks that you can control, new vendor compliance obligations. There are some new compliance obligations that I've had a couple of conversations. They don't seem to be on the radar of folks. So we're going to be diving deep on that. And if this topic doesn't seem fun, you got to come because it's my birthday. So we're going to be having a huge party. And we're going to be talking about new compliance obligations. Encourage you to come. I'm Nick. If we haven't met, great to see you. Now, round of applause for the one and only Ross Renan. He has degrees in nursing and law, and he runs a phenomenal business. So I've learned so much from him. If you don't follow him on LinkedIn, you've got to do it immediately. Ross, why don't you drop your LinkedIn in the chat at some time, or maybe somebody from our team can do it. This guy puts out phenomenal insights every single day. It's not every day. It seems very often. Super insightful, and we've been talking about doing an Ethicsverse, and so we're kicking the year off with it. How's it going, Ross?
Nick, nice to see you again. I appreciate you having us on. So thanks for the time today. It's awesome.
Absolutely. Okay, so you I'm sure you've started to hear how many lines of yours that I've been stealing. But one of them is this thing of kind of elevating from a compliance officer to a compliance executive. So maybe why don't you tell us a little bit of your background and how you kind of got into the game? By the way, one of the most highly reviewed ethics experts ever is me and Ross's. So I encourage you guys to check that out. So many great tips in there. But anyways, tell us a little bit about your story, Ross, and I think that's going to lay a great foundation for the rest of our conversation.
Well, thanks, Nick. So we started Ronan Healthcare Consultants in 2019. And, as this company, as a consulting firm, what we do is we establish compliance programs and stand as compliance officers for growing healthcare entities and those that are really committed to compliance. I spent about 20 years in as a chief compliance officer, executive vice president, chief compliance officer for very nationally, very large healthcare practice. And over that time period, they had a number of different specialties associated with it, whether it's ambulance, there's surgical centers, physician practice management, home health, hospice. So we got to see a lot of variety of different aspects and specialties that we could deal with from a compliance standpoint, and we were responsible for all of those. Prior to getting into compliance, I think most people on this call as compliance professionals can agree that, you don't pick a role in compliance. Compliance taps you on the shoulder and picks you, right? I had a good friend of mine who was associate general counsel for Tenet, called me up one day and said, "Hey, by the way, you're about to graduate law school. Would you like to be our compliance officer?" Back then it wasn't just Googling something. You had to, I think it was AOL with some dial-up, right? And so we had to figure out what a compliance officer was, researching the federal sentencing guidelines and all the other guidance out there from the OIG. And it really just kind of puts you in a position where you're kind of meant to do it. And as you look at a progression of a compliance officer, and we'll talk about that a little bit today, is what it takes to be that, going from a compliance officer to that compliance executive at the very highest levels of the organization. What does that mean? And it takes experience, it takes skill, it takes critical thinking, it takes maturity, it takes all of those things to be able to stand at the forefront of the compliance profession and really be the one that is heard. I did go to law school when I was a registered nurse. I was an ICU and ER nurse. I think that's where the critical thinking comes in. So.
Great rundown, phenomenal background. As you guys can tell, a lot of what Ross is highly, you're well equipped to have this conversation. You've had a lot of experience in that, and you've also had some great experience. Like, the proof is in your career, the fact that you were able to elevate to this, compliance executive, as you call it, type of a position. There's a lot of instances in your career where that moniker, or that badge you were able to earn, ended up opening some doors and letting you really expand your impact. So I'm excited to kind of dive in here. Our kind of abstract for this conversation is that, the OIG is saying compliance officers need to report directly to the CEO. They need to report directly to the board. I think if we did a poll across all organizations, even just ones that are, under the OIG, it's not like 80% are already doing that. It's a very small percentage that are already doing that. And so we're going to be diving in today, like, how do we actually start to make that happen? So let's kind of kick it off, Ross. How do we put this guidance into practice? We're somebody who's not reporting to the CEO right now. We're not reporting to the board. We know that that's where it's going, right? Even if we're not sort of under the OIG, all of these guys end up kind of moving together. What do we start to do now in order to make that guidance a reality for our world?
So if I can, Nick, I'd like to back up just a little bit about this guidance, because I think it's really important to kind of codify where it's coming from at this point in time, because this is not a new concept, right? The OIG has really talked about this with OIGs produced stuff with the AHLA or whomever about some compliance guidance to say, hey, it shouldn't be, you shouldn't be reporting to the CFO or the GC. And if you do, there's some parameters around how you do it. But really what you need to do is remain independent and free from influence of other things as a compliance officer, right? Anything that can alter your judgment in response to doing the right thing is really their direction, right? And these are only guidances; they're not recommended or not requirements. But this is the first time that I have seen outside of an article or something of that nature where the OIG has laid it out in their guidance, right? Back from the 90s, they didn't really talk about it. But as someone who, fortunately or unfortunately, I don't know how you want to classify that, who's managed in, out, and managed in and out of about 9 corporate integrity agreements throughout the tenure of my career. And everybody knows that corporate integrity agreements go anywhere from 3 to 5 years. So if you do the math, that seems a lot longer than I've been in compliance. So yes, there was contemporaneous corporate integrity agreements at a high level. But what that does is it really allows me, as my experience, to be able to go, hey, guy, by the way, corporate integrity agreements and non-prosecution or deferred prosecution agreements have always stated this. It was a requirement from day one. Thou shalt not report to the general counsel. Thou shalt not report to the CFO. And you will do this or else you will get fined under your corporate integrity agreement, right? So this has always been there, but this is really the first time we've seen this huge shift in the OIG putting it out. Now, back in 2020, I believe, don't if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. You guys correct me if I'm wrong. And codified again in March of 2023. The DOJ came out with how do we prosecute or how do we evaluate compliance programs and telling the surveyors how they need to do it. And what that really does is say, expertise. What's the structure? What's the expertise? What's the education? What are the resources? What is the independence that a compliance officer has to be able to run these programs? And so they're asking the questions now, right? And the greatest thing about the DOJ guidance is you really get an insight into what the DOJ is thinking. And what they ultimately say is, why is it structured this way? And they're going to ask the organization, they're going to ask the CEOs, they're going to ask the boards of directors, why did you do this? Why did you put the compliance officer under the CFO? Why did you put the compliance officer under the G? Why is he or she not independent from those functionalities? And they're going to have to answer for that, right? And it's really about the why. And if the why is, hey, you know what, I don't trust my compliance officer, wrong answer. B, hey, right, I can control them because I'm the CFO. B, wrong answer, right? So there's the why is really important as to the how, right? And then finally, remember that even though these are recommendations, the OIG and the DOJ are going to evaluate you when something happens to your organization. It's not if, it's when. It always does. There's a reason compliance exists. If everybody was compliant across the board, always, we wouldn't have a job and we would be doing something else and happily working at Starbucks making macchiatos, right? But we're not, right? We are compliance people. And so when it happens, they're going to be evaluating that compliance program to make sure that we put the thing in place.
Yeah, they're going to assume that there's some intentionality behind it, and you're going to have to answer for those decisions that were made, There's a rationale behind it, and you're going to have to explain it, and it better be a good one. So there's this massive paradigm shift. There's these very clear signals that are maybe more clear than they've ever been, and yet we still are in this sort of status quo compliance 2.0 type situation where folks are still reporting to GCs. They don't have that true unleashed power. They still, have arguably some potential compromises to their independence. So what's going to change it? If I can just pause real quick as you dial in that answer. 10 years from now, we're not going to be having this conversation. 10 years from now, a lot of this is already going to be taken care of. I think our challenge as next-gen ethics and compliance professionals is to condense that time. How do we make the future that would otherwise be 10 years from now, how do we make that be our reality 3 years from now, 5 years from now? So what do we start to do then to accelerate that for our own program or for our own career?
So I'm gonna disagree with you just a little bit on it's gonna be fixed in 10 years. I've been talking about this for 15 years and it still hasn't been fixed, right? I see it all the time where there's the compliance officer who's reporting to somebody they probably shouldn't have. And I think that's really a functionality of exactly the topic that you brought up. How do we move from a compliance officer to a compliance executive? And the number one reason that I know and that I see that the compliance officer, the compliance official, we'll call them, hasn't moved to that next level is because of distrust within the CEO and the board of directors. And distrust not meaning distrust like, hey, I don't think you're a truthful person or I don't think you're an ethical person. I think from a business standpoint, they look at it and say, I don't know what you'll do. Like you have the ability to reach the highest levels of this organization if I put you in this position. And I don't know if you're going to send my board off spinning out of control because you've told them a bunch of things that really aren't a risk to the organization, but for some reason in your mind that you have thought that, right? If we go back to the DOJ evaluation of compliance officers, it's experience, it's expertise, it's knowledge, it's all those other things you got to evaluate. So they're very scared of having the compliance officer have this direct access to CEOs, this direct access to the boards, which could just say, hey, by the way, I'm going to report whatever I want to because I am the compliance officer, and spin them out of control, which means that it can create dollars, it can create disasters, it can create exposures. And a lot of that is because of distrust. They fall back to general counsels because they trust their general counsel. They're like, hey, you went to law school. Hey, you're a fiduciary. Hey, you've got a law license. Hey, I can throw you underneath the bus if I need to with legal malpractice or whatever you want to call it. But ultimately, they rely on their general counsels as an individual who is like trustworthy to the organization because they're lawyers. Either way, it doesn't defend the independence that needs to happen with the compliance officer and the CEO, but building that compliance executive is the thing that we haven't done over the last 10 to 15 years. And it's really unfortunate. We need to start doing that. And maybe that means that everybody's not a compliance officer. Maybe that means that not everybody's going to be reporting to the boards or to the CEOs. But either way, we need to elevate this position to where it should be, as opposed to just taking it on as a moniker of saying, hey, by the way, I'm going to do this because you have designated me as a compliance officer. You got to work for it. You got to be an executive.
Yeah, and I think so. There's so much in what you just said. That paragraph or that answer could be its own podcast or its own, webinar in and of itself. But I think you touched on a really important point that many times is lost on us. I think a lot of us live in this sort of conditional tense, meaning the tense of should. Well, I should have this power. I should have this independence. I should have the ability to drive whatever change forward and so forth. But Ross, to your point, that should kind of is like a non-factor. What is what is, and that trust thing is a massive deal. And I think what it boils down to from an executive perspective is, do you, before I entrust you with a bunch of power to potentially spin the board off in this or spin off middle managers doing that, am I convinced that you are looking at the world in the right way, my way, right? I mean, that's the fact of it, right? I'm not saying that every executive is necessarily looking at it in the right way, but they hold the keys of power that you need in order to really elevate and be independent. You need to, it's a game of persuasion, to your point, to build that kind of trust, to show them that you are looking at, you're running at least a similar algorithm with a similar sort of hierarchy of priorities across what matters most to the business. Not just rules for rules' sake, but rules in the context of the risks that are actually in play for our business or something like that.
Yeah, there's a couple of criteria that I always start off with what makes a good compliance officer, right? One, and I tell this to all the compliance officers that I consult with, I coach with, I mastermind with, to try to get them to this level of being a compliance executive, is one, do you know your business? Period. End of story. If you don't know the business that you're working in and you just think your world surrounds this little compliance world, then you're not going to ever be a compliance executive. You have to know what it means. You have to know how it operates. You have to talk to the operators. You have to talk to revenue cycle. You have to talk to the CFO. You have to understand it right off the bat. If you don't, you have no ability you should be able to operate the company at the end of the day, right? Because you know so much about this company and the ins and the outs of it. That's how a compliance executive starts. Secondly, you got to know the regulations. I'm sorry, but you got to know them in and out, and you have to be able to interpret them and understand what they say. Just because it's the black letter of the law and it says X, Y, and Z, there's a lot of enforcement actions. There's a lot of interpretations. There's a lot of ways of doing things that says, how am I going to make this work within our organization that actually can protect them, right? But still allow them to grow and still allow them to be successful. And that's really what we need to do. Those are the kind of the two basic steps that I always tell compliance executives. That's where you need, compliance officers who want to get to that next level and want to be a strategic partner, who want the CEO sitting beside them going, we're doing strategic planning today. And by the way, I want you standing right next to me in case someone comes up with a harebrained idea. I can turn to you and go, hey, Ross, what do you think about that? Can we get there? And I go, maybe not that way, but I think there might be a way that you can do this, but you're kind of buttoned up against the guardrails. So those are kind of the 2 to 3 different ideas that we first have to establish in getting to be a compliance executive and winning that trust of both the CEOs and the boards.
So we have a great question in the chat. Do you see any difference at all between this topic in a public company setting versus a large private company setting, or even a small private company setting? This is often the rationale that I hear. This is what the person said. Thanks for that question. That's great.
So obviously difference between public and private, right? So once you're a publicly traded company, all eyes are on you, right? And I have been, again, fortunately or unfortunately, however you want to qualify it, part of both of those, right? And when you're part of a public company and there's a compliance issue, guess who writes about you? Every single Wall Street Journal, every single New York Times, or people write articles about you left and right and about your compliance program and things like that. So you're on public display, right? As a private company, you're exposed the same amount, right? And so it doesn't really matter whether you're public or private. I will tell you, in part of our risk analysis, that's one of the questions that we ask: are you public or are you private? Because there are different risk factors. One's higher, one's maybe not as high, but it still is out there. And then when you transition that from smaller to larger, the idea is if you're smaller, you're off the radar, right? The OIG, the MAX, the ZPICs, the UPICs, they're all judging you. They're all doing data analysis. And so if you're outside the outlier of your peers and you're kind of following within this, you're going to get a lot of audits. You're going to get a lot of investigations. This is a side of whistleblowers, right? You're going to get a lot of those kind of conversations and a lot of those activities by the government. And the bigger you are, the more you're going to outlie, right? And so that will actually trend it. But what I'm seeing a lot of, especially with private equity, who's coming in and rolling up a lot of these healthcare organizations, is this: even if you're small and you start to become part of a roll-up, the OIG, in their guidance that they just had, that they just put out there, are actually telling you that we're looking at private equity groups, we're looking at enforcement actions against them because they're rolling it up and there's dollars associated with it. So even the smaller ones are getting more and more publicity as it comes through. Now, if the question, and Nick, you just stop me if I'm going on and on.
No, you're good.
If the question is, should I have a compliance officer that reports to the CEO if I'm a larger company versus a smaller company? The answer is yes, absolutely. And there are ways to put guardrails around it, right? You can have the compliance officer report to someone who is not the CFO, not the GC, or not operations, and still make it okay, like a chief administrative officer or even the HR functionality. But the idea is they still remain independent and they still have access to the CEO and the board no matter what, right? And that is the guardrails that you have to put into place regardless of the structure, whether you're large, small, public, private, doesn't really matter.
Yeah, I think that's a good summary of it. I think many private companies will use that kind of as a straw man excuse to say, well, we're not public, this doesn't matter. Or the DOJ is just going after kind of public companies. And to your point, and in your experience, we all know that that's actually not true. A lot of at the start of this conversation, you kind of outlined all the things it takes to really be a compliance executive. And one of these things is not just executive presence, it's really about influence. And influence is about understanding how your, I know people hate this, but I do it anyways, how your adversary, the person on the other side of the table, how they actually see the world and understand what matters most to them. If we can understand those things, we can usually triangulate on a persuasion path that's going to resonate with them, because what we are asking for is the right thing, right? I mean, the guidance is out there. The precedents are out there. We know that to drive a great program forward, we need to have this kind of empowerment and this kind of independence and so forth. So we're not trying to sell kind of snake oil here. We're really trying to turn a light bulb on. So Deborah, thank you so much for that question. Jim, hey, how's it going, Jim? I want to share these 2 points and questions with you, Ross, to hear your reaction. But Jim said, I also find it's the result of the lack of understanding between the role and misaligned leadership objectives. They tend to fall back on GCs because they don't fully understand the potential potential competing objectives between GCs and chief compliance officers. So if that is like a light bulb that's off, there's not that understanding there, how would we address that to help kind of unlock some of this independence that, again, we need in order to turn into this compliance executive that's right there at the at the table, so to speak?
So I hope I do this right, but I'm going to push that up. Did that come up for the audience?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, great.
How about some more emojis for that, huh? This guy comes right in. He learns the platform in a second. Now we got a little something here. All right, thank you. Go ahead.
All right, this is a little infographic we put together. We presented this at AHLA 2 years ago at a general counsel forum. And what we really look at from this standpoint is, and this is at, even before the new guidance came out, is what does this mean, right? So when you say, okay, GC is the CCO, GC manages the CCO, GC partners with the CCO, those are different. Those are all the three different aspects that we look at from that standpoint. So when we go into boards, when we go into we call them executive compliance committees from our standpoint, which the CEOs and the CFOs all stand on this. This is the number one thing we talk about, is educating them on what we do as the compliance officer and what the general counsel should do as the GC. And if we kind of walk through this just briefly, if you split this person down the middle, right, and which we all know is just slightly above marginal of what you actually should do. You see that the GC has got fiduciary responsibility. They establish attorney-client privilege. They advise on regulation. They protect information. They keep it all in, right? Their job is to protect that organization and protect that business from doing wrong. And they have a fiduciary responsibility to do that, the duty of care. On a CCO's standpoint, they're independent, right? They don't have that fiduciary duty. They don't have a law license. They don't have some obligation to the organization. They're supposed to be transparent, right? We request attorney-client privilege. We don't have it. And the OIG hates and the DOJ hates when a compliance officer says, oh, I've asserted privilege because I'm also a lawyer. They go, no. That's not what we want. That's not what your position. That's not where you should be. We implement regulations as opposed to advise on them. And then we have total transparency. If we're not talking about the things that are coming in, then we're not doing the right thing, right? Maybe not reporting everything up to the CEOs and the boards to send them out of control, but you have a risk assessment to find out what is high, medium, and low risk, and you determine what that is. So when you look at this kind of infographic with the GC and the CCO, tell me how you defied yourself. At some point in time, you just switch the thing off and go, oh, no, I'm not going to do this, or no, I'm going to do this over here. It's almost impossible, right? And then just to put this kind of in another kind of circumstance, Senator Grassley went under the tenant agreement with, Sulzbach, who was the compliance officer and the GC, literally puts this out in a letter to tenants saying, you got to be crazy to think that it's not a conflict of interest to be both the compliance officer and the GC. And so don't do that. And she was a part of this suit, right? She eventually got let go, but she was a part of this suit. Going back to this, when the GC manages the CCO, you have administrative responsibility. That's okay, but you really want those guardrails like I talked about, right? With the reporting to the board of directors and the CEO, you can't prevent the CCO of detecting, mitigating, preventing issues. And in some cases, you can't even have this arrangement with CIAs and DPAs. And then the last one is the optimal, your partners in crime. Partners in crime. Ooh, that's a Freudian slip there. Your partners in your partners in defeating crime. We'll put it that way.
Exactly. Better.
Your partners in this. That's the optimal scenario. That's where we need to be from the standpoint of educating. To your question, Jim, to educating the CEOs, educating the general counsel, educating the board of directors that there is a difference and there is strength in partnerships here and not in being submissive to a GC or a CFO from that perspective. So
I love this infographic. I love that quote as well. Again, our job is to pull all of these different data points and all these different things that are out here to craft a persuasion path or a talk track that's going to resonate with the person who controls the power that we need to get in order to have that high agency impact, right? We need to grab the steering wheel of our careers, grab the steering wheel of our lives, and drive that to where it needs to go. How are you seeing, Ross? How are you seeing, you've worked with hundreds of compliance officers throughout your career. How are you seeing folks respond to this new guidance? Do you find that they're using it as a catalyst to drive it forward? Is it not as big of a drive as you would have kind of expected? What are you kind of seeing out there right now as a response,
Yeah, I see the focus of being, hey, finally we have something in writing that's more so than just an article by HLA and the OIG, as well as a mandatory thing in the CIAs and DPAs. So what I'm saying is this kind of hope that there's a betterment for the compliance program, but we still have to convince, we still have to understand, we still have to bring something to the table. Just because they say it should doesn't mean it doesn't mean it's going to happen, right? So there's a lot of CEOs going, I don't want to do that because I don't like my compliance director. I don't like my compliance officer. I know I have to have one, so I hired X, Y, and Z, and I don't really like them. Get a new one, right? Get someone you do like, but that's on us as compliance professionals in our industry to make sure that we are that person that they want sitting up there. So I think it helps us. I don't necessarily think it gives us the golden pass to be able to do this. And this really coordinates a little bit with back in the day when they actually first came out with these guidances, right? They came out and said, hey, you're going to have a compliance. You need to have a compliance officer, right? Yep. And the entire, especially in healthcare, they turn around and go, what? You're going to make me make somebody an officer of this organization? Like, no. You don't have to make them an officer of the organization. You have to call them an officer, but they're really not an officer of the organization. 9 times out of 10, there's not a compliance officer who's truly an officer of the organization. I spent 20 years. I was never an officer of the organization. I was an executive vice president. But at the end of the day, we're not that high level. But at that point in time, people were like, I have an officer role. Therefore, because you have deemed me as such, I have the power to do X, Y, and Z. And that's the total wrong approach. If we take that same approach with this, saying the OIG came out and they say that I must do this, and I must do this, and I must do this, it's going to have the same reaction, which is, yeah, it's to say you should, but it doesn't say like, if I don't, you're going to penalize me or throw me in jail. And that's really not, we need to be more convincing. We need to educate. We need to show these kind of infographics to say, this is why we need independence. This is better for you. This is better for the company. This is better for your growth. And I can help you get there.
I mean, you touched on something that I think a lot of us, and I've been victim of this myself, like there's this thing of like positional power that kind of comes along with the title. And I think we, on average, in a sort of steady state, will like overestimate the impact of that. I think our power is really kind of the implicit power. It's the power that comes from relationships. It comes from, what people think of us much more than anything else. Like my kids don't just like listen to me because I'm dad. It's because I yell a lot. You know what I'm saying? I'm kidding. Never yell. Right. But I'm just saying, like, whether you're an executive VP or you have that chief whatever title, at the end of the day, we're trying to be impactful in our organization. We're trying to be the trusted advisor in our organization. And that can happen with any title. You sitting next to the CEO when there's an acquisition happening, before the acquisition happens, when you're building out the diligence plan, well, that's where we want to get to because we want to be proactive. He's not going to say, oh, well, you're not a chief, don't come in here. He or she or whoever is on that team are looking for the people that are going to make their lives easiest, that are going to help them accelerate toward the goal, whether it's the acquisition or it's growing the business or it's doing whatever kind of the project du jour is. And that is built not from a title, it's built from the influence that we have in the organization, the impact that we've been able to have, and the relationships that we've been able to build.
Put your head down, get your stuff done, protect the organization, and make yourself relevant to the organization, not because you have the title, because you do good work, right? And that's what compliance officers need to do. And I tell that to everybody who's an executive within any organization. And I've had the same issue with general counsels. I am general counsel, hear me roar, right? And at the end of the day, they're not good general counsels. They're just an over-empowered, in-house counsel who feels like they can walk around with, doing whatever they want to. And I've had lots of those too. And I'm like, you just need to they need to be strategic partners too. And they need to be, legal executives, not just general counsels. So we see this problem across the board. It's not just compliance officers. It's just, I know more about compliance officers. So that's what I can opine on.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about, what I wanted to mention is that in the persuasion game, there are few things more powerful than this concept of a pattern interrupt. Okay, a pattern interrupt is when the pattern or what someone expects to happen doesn't happen, right? And this is why jokes are funny. And this is why, twist endings at the end of a movie are so memorable. It's because you think one thing is going to happen and then something else happens. And so if what I just said is true, then that actually opens up a huge opportunity for us to break the pattern relative to the stereotype that whoever we're trying to convince might have about our role. Ethics and compliance doesn't get it. The compliance officer at my last company was so rules focused, they didn't understand the business at all. If that's the pattern that they're expecting, how easy is it then to interrupt that with a little bit of a pattern interrupt? I want to get into some actual tactics here, Ross, on how we can sort of start to embed some pattern interrupts to help us accelerate our ascension up this mountain of influence and ultimately impact.
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways to do that. And when I say put your head down, do your work, and be relevant, I think that's the nuts and the bolts of it. How do you do that? That's really what you're asking. Like, how do you get there and how do you create that? I have a client who, just as an anecdotal story, who, we were the compliance officer for them and we helped establish and build their program. It came to the point that we were like, hey, you know what, you have enough work here that it's time to internalize this. As I was talking to the board and the CEO, we really kind of looked internally of somebody who really knew the business and who really wanted to change, but was really good at what they did. And we actually probably hurt the operations a little bit by taking this individual out of the operations. Brought her in as a manager, and she still reported to me. I was the compliance officer, kind of, mentored her down this road. And, less than a year later, she's reporting to the board. She's created this. She's got all of this authority. She's got all of this confidence. She's got all this trust of both the CEO and the board because she sat down, she understood it, she learned from people who know what they're talking about, and she put it into practice. And she also listened to what they needed and responded to them accordingly. So there's lots of different ways that we can go down each one of these paths, but anecdotally, she just raised to the level, and now she's the director of compliance, and now she's reporting independently to the board, and we're out of there. And so that's just such a great success story that we see of someone starting as a manager of compliance or a generalist of compliance, building their ranks where they're kind of keep going up and going, how do I build these skills so that I can have these conversations to have trust from the board, have trust from those CEOs. So
did she wander to that position of power, do you think, or was there some intentionality behind that transition from manager to reporting to the board, all that?
As we talked about it, I noticed her ability to go, hey, I could learn this. So for example, it'd be something like, hey, we have this issue, X, Y, and Z. And I'm like, okay, well, you need to go back and read the regulation. You need to understand what it is. And then you come up with your, we call it the 131 rule. We stole that from Dan Martell, who stole it from somebody else.
I stole that from you. Yeah. I was talking about that today.
From somebody else. Right? I wish I was the originator of everything, but I'm not. But I will give credit if I remember who it's from. The 131 rule is, identify the problem, come up with the 3 best responses, and then your final recommendation, right? And so at the end of the day, she goes, I already did that. She asked me the question, and then she said, I already read the regulations, and this is where I think, but this is the issue I just wanted to bring it to your attention. And I'm like, boom, that's where I want you to be. That's the next level. You understand it. And then she regurgitated it to me on the 3 different things and came up with a recommendation. I'm like, why do you need me? That was perfect. You understand the regulations. You understand how it affects the business. You understand how it's going to be implemented. You can communicate that effectively. You're on your trajectory up, right? So that was kind of the beginning, and you get it. You get it. You understand it, how it affects the business. You understand it's not an all or nothing. You understand that you're not a road bump. You understand you're a strategic partner, and you understand the ways to get to that level to be that compliance executive. And she's not quite there yet because she's just a director, but she'll get there, and she'll be that compliance executive here probably within the next year. So it's really encouraging to me.
I just wonder how many of us are stuck due to we're stuck in a prison of our own making. I talk to folks who don't view themselves as that strategic lever, or maybe they've lost hope, or maybe they've been jaded, or, they don't see kind of a path to it. And then if that's the case, well, then we're just going to goal seek for whatever vision we have of ourselves. You know what I'm saying? We're going to end up turning into whatever vision we have. And if we don't have a vision, then we're just going to kind of drift into something. I think having that vision of not only a clear vision of what that strategic partner looks like, but also a clear vision of okay, well, I need to do some things differently to kind of break these prison walls down and kind of change my circumstance. that's maybe the most foundational like thing to start with, right? Like changing this vision that we have of ourselves. We're not a cost center. We are a strategic lever in the organization. We can unlock so much magic in the company. We can crowdsource risk intelligence. We can find ways for improvement. We can find ways to let the vehicle of business run down the road a lot faster, but it's going to take us to do it. You know what I'm saying? The GC, I mean, look at the freaking infographic. The GC has a bunch of other things that they're worried about. HR has other things they're worried about. The CEO has other things that they're worried about. It's like, who's going to provide those insights at the point of risk, and who's going to be gathering back that risk intelligence at scale to help, de-risk the platform and build this culture of integrity? It's on us to do it. But if we're waiting for someone to give us like, okay, here is your badge, friend, it's not going to happen. So let's say that we're starting, I want to talk through in the next kind of whatever 15, 20 minutes that we have here. I want to talk through like how we can start to overcome some of the challenges in implementing or in ascending to this position of, whatever you want to call it, influence within the organization. Let's talk about, building and developing this relationship with the CEO and board. If you're someone who's starting from nothing, or you're in a lot, where, you feel like you're, miles away from this promised land that like you just kind of described, where do you start? Is it just building relationships? Is it starting to try to get in front of the CEO and take real great take advantage of those moments of exposure? Where do we start?
So I think you hit the nail right on the head. We are a victim of our own demise, right? As compliance officer, we have created this situation all for ourselves. And so the first thing that we have to do is be better. Period. End of story. There's no magical pill. There's no magic beans that can, make you want to be wanted by the CEO. You have to start by changing, right? You have to start by being an executive. You have to start by showing leadership potential, right? Once you start showing that, then the CEOs will realize that. And I'll tell you what, if you have a good CEO, and if you don't have a good CEO, you probably shouldn't be there in the first place, because you do have liability and you do have exposure. So if you don't like your CEO and you don't feel like they're ethical and you don't feel like they have integrity, get out. Don't deal with it, because it will have something bad will happen. So if you like your CEO, if you like what they have to say, start learning from them. Learn how they talk to different departments, learn how they communicate to different people, and start emulating that type of executive level individual, right? Once you start creating that self kind of realization that you are an executive and that you can learn and you can talk like those individuals, then I think you build relationships with the CEO, which means that, hey, you have these conversations, you're not bringing irrelevant things to them. You're not bringing low risk things to them. You're bringing things to them that are actively affecting the organization. You're making he or she understand that you are protecting this organization because you're preventing, detecting, and mitigating, and you have all the controls in place to do so, right? And you're like, hey, my job for you, CEO, is so you can sleep well at night and grow this business. Right? That's my job for you. And you have to trust that I'm going to do that to you. And I'm going to bring the things that are relevant to you.
And we're aligned in that. And I'm trying to make what you want to happen faster.
Exactly. Right. And on the right side of the road. Right. But again, this all goes back to, do you trust your CEO? Does it have integrity? Whatever. Right. And so if you believe that, then you should be lockstep with your CEO, and they should want you lockstep with them. Right? And dealing with that. That's how that trust starts to develop. And at the end of the day, I mean, so just anecdotally, again, I know we only have a few minutes, but I was taken from the compliance officer role at my previous company to run the operations at the highest level.
I just want everybody to really think about that. Think of the level of trust that Ross was able to establish. Think of the level of competence he was able to show, and think of, I mean, that's a massive change. That's an extremely important change. And that should be inspiration for us, that not only have others sort of blaze that type of a trail, but like, what executive is not looking for smart people who care, who can help the mission of the organization be achieved more efficiently? They all are. Okay. So that's the answer. And I would say, regardless of your level, the things we're talking about here.
Ooh, I think you lost audio, Nick. I think you lost audio. But I can keep talking. So yeah, absolutely. Those are the best 3 years that I spent, was in operations. And what it really allowed me to do was to be able to understand the organization, understand how it works, and understand how compliance was affected by the organization. So, it was really important for me to be able to do that. And that was something that was, imperative. After about 3 years, I was asked to come back to the compliance program and rebuild it because it kind of got off rails. But knowing that, and knowing that there was a confidence in the compliance officer, who's generally a roadblock, right, to run operations and then go, hey, you did a great job here, let's come back to compliance. And for our standpoint, we had to have one because we were under corporate integrity agreements, right? So they didn't have a choice but have a compliance officer report to the board. We still changed that to a have to a want to. And that was really important.
Am I back now?
You are.
I was saying the most brilliant thing. It may have been like my smartest thing ever. Too
World
bad.
Hunger, right? You just
so what I was going to say, I'm kidding, of course, but whatever we're talking about fractals down into whatever role you're in. If we're talking about within, if we're talking about your, a front level person on the compliance team, well, the battleground then is your manager or the compliance officer within your organization. And it's the same notes of the same song. We want to build trust. We want to show that we get it. We want to show that we understand what matters in the context of what matters most to the business. We understand our business, whether it's a department or it's the broad organization.
You lost audio again. You lost audio again, Nick. We can lip read though. But I think Nick's making a very valid point there. From the standpoint of
in the compliance department. What a phenomenal question. Round of applause for that question. That was a really great question. What's your reaction to that, Ross?
So I didn't hear at all what you just said because I think you lost audio.
Did I just die again?
Or did I? Did I lose audio?
Can you see it?
Can you hear me? Am I on, Nick? Hello? Hello? Nick, we can hear you now. Thank you, Elise. I appreciate it.
Sorry, you guys. Something is happening. I think it's with this platform, so I'm not sure. Can you guys hear me now?
We can now. Yes.
Did you hear that question from Pamela?
I did not, but let's hit it. I'm ready to answer it. Sounds like a good question.
Phenomenal question from Pamela. Apologies. I'm just going to reread this really quickly. Sorry about that, you guys. Compliance is such a huge department. When you are new, how do you determine what you need to be a subject matter expert on? Is it about passion? Is it about past work experience, being able to understand and educate yourself in the category you really want to be a part of? And how do you start to approach your supervisor or your leader about how you want to branch out in your area in the compliance department?
That's great. And when you say subject matter expert, I don't know if you're talking about elements of the compliance program, you're talking about elements of business, you're talking about elements of regulations. But I will tell you that, number one, I knew nothing about compliance when I went into my first compliance officer role. That was under a corporate integrity agreement. I did every single bit of research that I could possibly do to understand this business and understand the regulations that affected it. Every single nuance. And what I did is I also talked to the experts in the industry. I used my resources to go, how do I get more information? How do I get coaching? How do I get to be to that next level? Join things like this, right? This is a great forum. We didn't have things like this back in those days, but this is a great forum for you to learn those kind of things. And if you're like, hey, I'm an auditor, I want to learn auditing, or I want to do policy work, I want to do investigations, then find your passion, find your niche, and pursue that, right? And really go after it. There's education, there's certifications you can get. If you like coding, you become a certified professional coding auditor. You can do all kinds of different things to be able to promulgate where you're going. And by the way, if you do that, if you're a generalist or you're a specialist or you're a manager within an organization and you've got 40 employees in your compliance department, or you're like a DaVita has got like 100 and something in their compliance department, right? And you're just trying to work your way up. You get all those things, you understand what it is, and go somewhere else to take your skills to somebody who can appreciate it, right? So if the people below you are not appreciating what's happening with your education, with your subject matter expertise that you're developing, take it someplace else, because there's a lot of places out there that could use that type of person who can self-advance, self-understand, critical think, and develop as they need to develop.
I mean, those skills that you listed at the front of this conversation, those are so widely applicable. I mean, those are just base skills that like translate into anything. And, again, sometimes we get kind of comfortable in the bathwater that we're kind of soaking in. And our industry, if you compare it to other industries, it has massive tailwinds. It is expanding faster than most other departments, equivalent departments in our organization. So to your point, those opportunities are out there. And, Wendy really resonated with what you were saying about getting out if that opportunity is, if it's not the right place. There's always other lily pads. There's always other opportunities out there. Don't fall into this sort of victim mentality where it's like, you know what, I'm kind of stuck. You're never stuck. The skills that we build in this game translate into so many different areas. But again, it takes that high agency thing to say, okay, this guidance is out here. These skills are available for me. This is the business I'm in. These are the things that, I can maybe focus on that are going to help move the needle for our organization. And you have to do that extra work. Like you said, you stepped into this role and you rolled your sleeves up and you did a bunch of research and you tried to equip yourself with the skills that you need. So a little risk assessment, a career self-risk assessment on like, what skills am I lacking? What book should I read? I mean, there's so many freaking resources out here now, right? Like there's really no excuse to not be getting better at all times. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So here's a great question. Hey, Sarah, thanks for this question. How does OIG view reporting under Chief Legal Officer with requirements to report to CEO and board quarterly? I recently checked large health plans like Aetna and Humana, and it appears that they still have this structure. I'm curious if there is a view about the administrative reporting for performance management versus requirements to report. What a great question.
Yeah, so if you look at what we have here, the GC manages CCO, I think that's what you're actually talking about, right? Or the CLO, however you want to call the GC. Mm-hmm. And really, it's about guardrails, right? Administratively, who cares? Who cares who evaluates you? Who cares who signs your paycheck? Who cares who does your performance review, unless they're actually doing it based upon reporting or you finding issues and disclosing them. If that's it, then you have a bigger issue, right? But who cares? Like, who cares administratively who you report to? But if I can pick up the phone and I can call the CEO, or if I can pick up the phone and I can call my board of directors, that's the independence that you need. Right. And that's where it's really important. And as long as you're not responsible as a compliance officer for things that you can put yourself in a conflict of interest for, you're going to have the best bet to be able to have that functionality, have that independence, and have that reporting relationship to the right board. So if you have that, you're great. If you actually give that right up to the legal officer to report up to the CEO and the boards, then you're really not the compliance officer, and that's subject to the GC and the CLO.
You think we have time for one more quick question?
I'm yours.
All right. Well, all right, here we go. So how do you ensure that this new dynamic doesn't alienate you from the rest of the organization? Or how do you maintain, if it's a move from, you're reporting to the GC, for example, I'm just kind of brainstorming, you're reporting to the GC and you're fighting to sort of break out of their grips, I'm being dramatic, of course, into that direct line to the CEO or the board. How do you not alienate yourself from that org or from that person that might view that as a, usurping some of their power or something?
So first and foremost, and I'll pick on the GCs for a second. One of the reasons why compliance reports to GC on occasion is that they ask for it. They feel like that's their bailiwick and they want to be it's a power struggle. It's a power grab, right? From their
Yeah.
standpoint, you're never going to get past that. And so that person's always going to have those issues. But the reality of it is you have to be a partner with human resources. You have to be a partner with the general counsel. You have to be a partner with operations. You have to come to the table and go, I'm not over you. Just because I report to the board, I'm not better than you. I'm not all of these things. We are partners together. And every single thing that I have a compliance issue with has some sort of HR functionality with it, has some sort of operational functionality, and always has a legal issue. I will take every one of those pieces to every one of those departments and go, this is a compliance issue. I need your assistance. I need your guidance. I need you to help me understand from your perspective, do you have any exposure? From your perspective, do you have any exposure? And what I keep telling everybody is HR and compliance are the biggest kind of, I'll say, adversaries in the kind of the real world of support services, right? If compliance department starts overstepping their boundaries and starts doing the job of human resources or doing the job of operations or doing the job of quality, you are disempowering them to be good at what they do. And 100%. That's the worst thing that you can do, right? Empower them to be successful, empower them to do their job, ask for their assistance, ask for their guidance, but still hold on to your requirements in your structure. That way you will never get usurped on the department by department standpoint.
Great advice. Man, this was so fun. I feel like we could keep going. We are right at time. So round of applause for Ross. Please do follow him. Check out his organization. Check him out on LinkedIn. Every time I see one of your videos, I'm always stopping and jotting things down. Big difference between us. You will cite, you will give credit to someone who you stole their framework from. I won't. But just keep in mind, if I say something smart, I probably stole it. But almost new record for emojis, 1,600 reactions. So you were on fire today, Ross. Thank you so much for joining. We got to do this again soon. Everybody, we hope to see you next week for our IEDB strategy sesh. We're going to be diving deep on how to actualize and how to turn inclusivity into a strategic lever in your organization. See you next Thursday. Love all you Ethicuties out there. Take care.